Hi everyone and welcome along. Today we are going to do another lovely bit of word art and feature a few more of my favourite seasonal flowers that bloom in January. So grab your paints and let's get started. Right, so we're going to begin with some simple lettering. As before, I use a set square and an HB pencil. My piece of paper is 9 inches wide, and I think that's the key thing for this today because handily January has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 letters, so it allows us an inch either side and an inch for each letter. So I've just done 2 parallel lines that are 1.25 inches distance, and I've just put out little markers where I've basically got 1 inch space for each letter. Now if I just move my paints out the way, what I'm going to do is I'm going to freehand some and others I'm going to need the ruler. So I'm going to use the fact that I've got this horizontal top line here, it's very handy. That's why I like using a set square rather than just a ruler, because you get a nice right angle. And I'm going to begin by drawing in, and I'm doing this all by eye. I'm not sort of worrying too much, but essentially I am drawing in nice sort of serif letters, and I'm not necessarily going to go sort of all the way out to the edges. I'm just going to use the fact that I have this inch space for each one. For letters like A, the symmetrical, it's useful to measure the central point and then draw in with a ruler, and I'm going to do one side thicker than the other and pop in a little cross line. So I'm just going to make my way across, drawing in all the letters, and as you can see, just stopping just a little bit shy of the 1 inch edge I've given myself. And the reason for that is because we are going to be drawing in flowers, seasonal flowers, and I want to have lots of space for those. So I'm just going to finish filling all of that in and then we can get painting. And just adding a few little serif hats here and there, and that's really nice to start with. So the only other thing we need the pencil for is to draw in where we're going to have our little plants and foliage. And the great thing about this one today is we're going to do the lettering quite dark. We're going to paint it in after we've put the flowers in, so I can draw in my flowers and stems quite happily. So I'm going to begin with a Freesia, which is a lovely January flower. I was really amazed actually at how many January flowers there were. You just assume it's quite a quiet time of year. And then we're going to draw in a few other stems. I've got a Forsythia here, and the idea is I'm going to sort of have them slightly sort of wrapping around and intertwining, but sometimes sort of coming in behind as well. So I'm just going to draw in a few stems. Some things I might not yet know what I'm going to paint, but it's just useful to know where they're all going to come in. Of course, there are roses that grow in January, which is rather lovely, and of course things like snowdrops and daffodils. I know this time of year, in this day and age, it's anyone's guess of what might crop up, because the seasons and the weather do seem to change. But if you just choose your plants and get them drawn in, and then I'm going to show you how to paint the various bits. I'm going to begin with freesias. So if you don't know what a freesia is, I highly recommend going and looking it up. It's a a flower that cascades down one side of a stem. So what I've got is, with my size, I've got a miniature brush. I've got a 3/10 here, but whether you've got a 4/10, 2/10, anything nice and miniature, we're going to paint in a really dilute little sort of triangular trumpet of a sort of limey green. So I have a mixture of Sap Green and Cadmium Yellow, and you'll see here the buds get just that little bit smaller as they go down. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take a bit of permanent rose, and this sort of yellowy greeny colour blends up into a lovely flower. So whilst it's still wet, I'm going to paint in some little sort of soft-edged loops of colour to create these. They are like sort of trumpeting petals, I think. It's a nice way of describing them. And they just get slightly smaller as they go down. So by the end, you're just sort of painting a little tip of pink in there. And I think what's going to be nice with this word art is if we have a little bit of continuity, so I'm going to paint in some more on the A here. So let's do that again. Little triangles, but the biggest one is the first one. And then getting just a bit smaller to the point where you're just painting in a dab of very dilute colour. At this point, I'm not worrying too much about whether my flowers are in front of or behind the lettering, because the lettering is going to be quite strong in colour. Freesias come in all sorts of lovely colours. I'm going to choose Cobalt Violet to paint in my second one. Keep your colours, even though quite vibrant, keep your paint dilute, because if you had it really, really concentrated and strong, it would look too loud, too bold, and wouldn't fit in with the miniature scale. I think one of the things a lot of people don't think about is when you're painting a miniature item, actually what's happening is the colour is shrinking as well. I know that sounds a bit strange, but the colour fades as it goes off into the distance. So that's one really handy way of being able to show things looking nice and small. Okay, so we're going to let those dry for the minute before we put the stems in. I've just got some cadmium yellow here, and I'm now going to paint in a little branch of Forsythia, which is a lovely yellow flower, again seasonal to January, which it's a branch full of these little yellow flowers, which can just be painted with a series of dashes, whether you want to do an open faced flower like this or one that's on the side. You can just fill your page with lots of lovely little dashes of yellow. And they don't all have to be sort of fully formed flowers. There could just be a little dash here and there to give a sense of the fullness of the flowers on the branch. To paint snowdrops, obviously we are all familiar with the white flower of the snowdrop, but how to paint white on a white page, and also in miniature, it's a real challenge. So what I like to do is I mix up a really dilute shadow mix of burnt sienna and French ultramarine blue, and then I'm going to just mix in a tiny bit of a green tone. That might be not quite right. Here we go. Sap green. I'm just going to put in the faintest bit. See, that was hardly any, wasn't it? You could put a tiny weeny bit more, and my little snowdrops are going to go here. So with that very, very faint colour, it is going to go on very pale, but it's going to dry with a lovely crisp edge. So the snowdrop, a triple sort of hanging teardrop cluster like these. And this time I'm using my 4/10 brush. Now I'm so thrilled that so many of you have bought these brushes now. If you didn't know, I'm now a stockist of Pro Art Masterstroke Series 60 brushes, which are these white handled brushes that I use almost religiously. And if you would like to get your hands on the set that I have curated, because I feel they are the best sort of set of sizes you need to paint my paintings anyway, you can find those in my Etsy store, and the link is just below in the episode notes. So you can see even that first one has started to crisp up and dry, but again we're just going slowly and cautiously because miniature paintings are so delicate. We're not going to rush in and paint in the stems just yet. Now I think 2 roses would be really nice to finish off this piece, so I'm going to pick up some Alizarin Crimson. Here we go. And let's paint a miniature rose or 2. So again, really miniature brushes today. Pointed rounds just mean you can get a lovely rounded sort of fullness, but also a nice little fine tip. So let's go. So we start in the middle with just a little blob, and then what we do is we start to wrap brush strokes around the edge, fanning out the brush, getting that nice fullness. Like I was saying, the rounded point means you can get the fullness of the bristles as well as a lovely fine tip, which is everything when you're painting roses. Now if you would love to actually have a bit more of an in-depth look at how to paint roses like these, then I have tutorials in my flowers and foliage playlist all about how to paint roses, and I am just going to put in a few little buds here and there, little sort of cup shapes, and then we'll put in another rose up here. This one is going to be on a bit more of a slant, so when I say a slant, more of a 3/4 angle we're going to view it from, so the shape is slightly more squashed and less round. So I'm adding more to the sides rather than to the top and bottom in full. And this one here, we'll do another. I do find with roses, no one really hits the nail on the head first time. It's all about practice, and so please don't be disheartened if your first roses look like funny little Swiss rolls or spirals. It will come, I promise. And as you can see, really, it's just a matter of some rather abstract brush strokes, so don't be disheartened. Okay, so we'll just do some little buds there. Okay, so we've got all our flowers painted in. It's time to paint in some stems. So I'm going to be using Sap Green here, as well as I've got some Cobalt Turquoise, which is always a really nice addition, especially when you've got quite a few pink tones going on in the piece. It just gives a lovely freshness. So I'm going to work my way along. And again, still not worrying too much about whether my stems are going in front or behind of the actual lettering. So let's have a look at the Freesias. So the Freesias have a little sort of a tiny little U shape at the bottom of the flower. Quite a slender stem. And then from that first one, you grow the second one out, and then from there a little curve to get the next one, and the next one, and the next one. It's little details like that, rather than just sort of painting a completely straight line. To actually do it like that just gives it a tiny bit more of a realistic look. So let's do that again. Little U shapes at the bottom of the flower, and that tiny bit of unpainted space again also just helps with the detail. And that loop out there, another U. Another U. I'm saying U is in a U shape, but it's barely a U shape as it is. It's just a slight curve. The Forsythia has a slightly more woody stem, so I've got some burnt sienna, quite concentrated here, and I just knock it back a little bit with a little bit of French ultramarine blue. So we're using the same sort of mix for shadow mix. Isn't it amazing that that and that are made by pretty much the same colours? It's just all about how much or how little water you're using. Now I'm going to use my smallest brush, my 4/10, and I'm going to do this little woody stem. So we're going to see little branches coming off the main stem. And if you feel actually now, you're like, oh, I could add in a few more, then you could draw in a few more stems. And then you can add yellow flowers that way. So you can just add some extra little yellow flowers to anything you've drawn in extra. Snowdrops have a slightly yellowy green stem, but only a little bit, so we're going to add in a bit of that green gold, and going to just go over the top with my brush. And also paint in a nice sort of looping leaf or two. So they have a little blob at the top. And then loop down. And I'm just using the thin and thick of my brush. Even with this teeny weeny 4/10, you can still get a lovely range of thin and thick. And finally we've got the roses. Now I'm definitely going to put a bit of blue into the green for the roses because they always have a nice sort of sharpness to them. Using a slightly bigger brush here. Got my 3/10, and I'm going to begin by just adding these little sepals underneath the main rose there, and that curling stem can have some leaves, and by doing, I just angle the brush quite low down close to the paper and just squish it and bring it back with the tip, and there we have some lovely rose leaves. So there'll be a few sepals under that one, but this rose here, the sepals will still be coming up. If you wanted, you could add in just a tiny bit more blue into the base of those leaves there. And that will spread nicely. I just love details, and so the last thing we do on these little flowers before we put in the lettering is look at other places where we can get a little bit extra in. So you can see these 3 flowers, I've added in just little bits of extra, more concentrated colour, and I'm going to show you how I did that on the remaining lot. So for these little tiny forsythia, I've just got a little bit of cadmium orange mixed in now with cadmium yellow, and it's so minuscule and almost impossible to see, but I'm adding tiny little bits of orange to the underside of some of the flowers. With the Snowdrops, I've just mixed in a little bit of French ultramarine blue to my Sap Green, and I'm just going to add just a little bit of that to the leaves. If you need to sort of smooth a side like that, or create a little bit of a shadow. And then that also works really nicely for a little bit extra on these. And then I'm just going to take a bit more of the concentrated purple and just add in just a few more little loops of colour, just to give a bit more of a fuller sense of the flower. And then for the roses, a bit more of the Alizarin Crimson, and I'm just going to sort of pick up some of the sort of shade on the underside of the flower from the side or from the middle, just add that little accent of colour on the other, sort of the bottom half of that open flower. And then a little bit of that Sap Green blue mix for a few leaf lines. Okay, and we've got some lovely detailed flowers now. Okay, so I'm going to paint in the lettering now, and I'm actually going for a really striking dark colour. What I want to do is paint in the lettering really dark and deep with a mixture of Paynes Grey and Mars Black. So I'm just going to mix that up, and then we can start our lettering. It's important that your flowers have dried before you launch into this, so it's all down to personal preference really, what brush you prefer, what size brush. Obviously there are going to be the larger areas where you don't want to have too small a brush, because that's just going to take forever. But then in the areas where we're going to be doing the flowers stems overlapping, we're going to need a detailed brush. So I've got a 3/10 at the moment, and it's pretty good for not getting in the way of the flowers, but of course 4/10 would be even better, but would mean that you just spend just a bit more time when you're colouring in the larger sections. But I think this colour works really nicely, and I know that the stem colour is fairly dark itself, but I am still going to paint around it. So I've left a tiny sliver of unpainted space there, and I think that works quite nicely. So this one here I'm going to paint over the top. Because my colour is nice and strong. It works absolutely fine. If you prefer, you could always use like a black ballpoint pen or something like that to do this lettering, but it is nice to just try the technique of painting in nice concentrated colours and just sort of, yeah, getting used to the layering and what watercolour can do at different concentrations. And there we go. So once that is dry 100%, you can rub it out, and what about that for a rather lovely bit of January floral word art. Thanks so much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed that one. I want to say a huge thank you to my patrons for their support, because that support enables us to keep creating videos like these that everyone can enjoy. And if you enjoyed that one, then hit the like button and comment below to let me know how you got on. And of course, if you want to never miss another video, you can subscribe by hitting the subscribe button and the little notification bell just next to it. Okay, until next time, bye!